on this computer. I haven't yet set up a YouTube channel, but I'm going to start doing that because I've been recording more of these. So
Of course.
let you know when it's available.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to share it. I just made a very hard pitch. I spoke for the city of Louisville just a minute ago on the value of independent bookstores to our communities. They said, "How should we buy your book?" I said, "Not Amazon. Go to a bookstore."
Thank you. We appreciate that. Boy, you made my day. Well, I want to wait a couple more minutes just because we're just now hitting 11 and
Of course.
we don't start too
And
late.
and for you, Linda and Dan, I was going to open up with a little bit of a spiel and a story. And then ultimately, I really love dialogue. I love answering what people are curious about, what you're curious about. So just, it'll be social off the cuff, but
Sure.
whatever it is, just feel free to ask.
That sounds wonderful. Wonderful. I'm going to let Sue in. Yeah, people are going to come straggling in here. So, and see, notice how you're going to get smaller and smaller as we go along.
Story of my life.
Mine too, I'm afraid. Except for, this way, I'm not smaller and smaller. Anyway, well, I suppose we can start soon because we'll be introducing the club first. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the group. It's the first one for this new group. And it's an experiment in a way. And yeah, I'm very grateful that Mike is willing to help us with the experiment. And I'm not sure what I would like to do with this group is to have more people cover issues and topics that just don't normally show up in book groups. So next month, I have a lady who goes around the world and eats bugs and worms and things. So that ought to be fun. But we have traditionally had some very great groups, but of course, now that we've had to move to Zoom and everything virtual, a lot of people are not comfortable with that or don't want to. So we're very happy when folks do come. And this particular first session, I fell in love with your book, first of all. And then it just sort of came about that as I was talking with Jennifer, who works with you and at Ben Bella Books, and I said I was interested, and next thing I knew, here we were setting up this meeting. So I am going to talk about the book just a tad. This is what it looks like for those of you who have not picked up a copy yet. If you choose to get one through Auntie's, be sure you tell them that it's book club and you get your discount, 15% off. So we want to make sure that happens for you. Otherwise, you can get it anywhere you want except Amazon. Nobody is allowed to buy. No, you can get it wherever you want. This is a free country, and I understand, but we appreciate your support when you get things from Auntie's or the library. AI, I think, is probably, as Mike's going to tell you, it's one of those huge, huge umbrella issues and topics. There isn't a part of our lives that AI doesn't touch. And it's only going to continue. Earlier on today, I was looking at my emails and my notices, and there they were with the Halloween thing from, I won't say the candy bar, but a certain candy bar outfit with their remote door that goes down the street so the kids can get candy from it. And I'm like, okay, I think that's a bit of AI to tell this thing not to run over the kids. So I think that there won't be an area at all in our lives. And right now, of course, with the political climate around the world, we're all kind of concerned about how this is going to impact right now our election, because AI is one of the things, as Michael will point out to you, that allows people to fiddle with our elections. So I'm going to just let you know who Mike is, reading the little bio on the back of his book, and because that's the best way. Michael Kanaan was the first chairperson for artificial intelligence for the U.S. Air Force Headquarters, Pentagon. In that role, he authored and guided the research, development, and implementation strategies for AI technology and machine learning activities across Air Force global operations. He is currently the Director of Operations at the Air Force MIT Artificial Intelligence Accelerator. In recognition of his fast-rising career and broad influence, Kanaan was named to the Forbes 2019 30 Under 30 list and has received numerous other awards, including the Air Force's 2018 General Larry O. Spencer Award for Innovation, as well as the U.S. government's Arthur S. Fleming Award, and honors shared by past recipients Neil Armstrong, Robert Gates, and Elizabeth Dole. He is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy and previously led a national intelligence campaign for Operation Inherent Resolve in Syria and Iraq. I hope you all join me in welcoming Michael Kanaan. Take it away.
Thanks, Linda. I am so appreciative for the opportunity and for your focus and care on this crucial topic that you had discussed. And to those of you on the line taking your time out of your day to think about these topics. You know, as we go through the pandemic, I hope that you and your loved ones are all safe and hibernating safely, of course. At the same time, I hope a portion of this pandemic, these conversations, the thought that learning is a lifetime sport, largely stays with us. And I just got off a call with the city of Louisville, Amplify Louisville, and they said, how should we buy your book? And I said, not Amazon, right? I happen to be doing a talk for aunties, buy local, support local. Our independent bookstores are crucial to our communities. So to you, Linda, and to you, Dan, and to everyone here, I just want to say thank you. And I think about telling stories. That's how we learn best. So I want to start today with a story. I began my career after graduating the U.S. Air Force Academy as an intelligence officer at the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. In fact, there is no doubt that many people on this line have somehow reaped some benefit from that national treasure of ours at some point in their lives. Upon graduation from intelligence school, my first job was here. It was commanding a new mission. The mission was called ACES High. We like acronyms. So the acronym is the Airborne Cueing and Exploitation System Hyperspectral. It was a first of its kind for us, and we were mere months out from flying our first missions in the Middle East. Daytime in the Middle East, that is, nighttime for us. Because a hyperspectral sensor works much like our eyes do, except better. You and I see in 3 color bands. A mantis shrimp sees in 12. One may philosophically ask, well, what does a mantis shrimp see that we cannot? But a hyperspectral imager, the thing I'm talking about now, it sees in hundreds. So what does that mean? Well, it can measure the radiance from reflected sunlight off of a material on the ground. And when we look at it through these color bands during the day, of course, because again, sunlight, we can identify certain materials spectrally significant in the range in which it collects. Long story short, it was this which initially led to my passion for artificial intelligence, because I forgot to say the year. It was 2011 at the time. And what was happening then in the world? Well, there was this thing called ImageNet, led by Dr. Fei-Fei Li. It was probably the last time that we have grown out of what we deemed as AI winters, this whole idea that we were disillusioned by AI, for it didn't work. And the concept of ImageNet was pretty simple. It was to take a bunch of pictures of things like cats and food, put them into a database, and then because of some advancements that took place in the way our computers work, some advancements in math and the way we express that math in our machines that are in front of you now, we were able to see if the computer could identify more of those objects than the human. And it was the first time that the computer outperformed the human. And as long as us on this phone call and throughout society, we don't ourselves kick the proverbial can down the road about, well, what is artificial intelligence? It really came out of its last winter, and now it's here to stay. So when you think about what we were doing then, we were collecting a massive amount of data that we somehow needed to send back through all of our satellites to be processed where I was in Ohio. And this was all happening within seconds, with only 16 of us there, all flying the plane, moving this hyperspectral imager I discussed, and doing all the analysis to, at a moment's notice, let a sailor, soldier, airman, Marine on the ground know there's something you need to be concerned about. Sometimes that was literally turns away, seconds, minutes from a convoy on the road, per se. Because again, we could definitively detect and see what the human eye couldn't, such as explosives. This was a big deal. And for those of us who know how to think about artificial intelligence or frame the problem, it was perfect. But again, this was 2011, and I was 22 at the time, running around saying, hey, we should do artificial intelligence. Now, in the commercial and academic world, one would say, well, of course. In government, you might as well have been out of your mind, Lieutenant Kanaan at the time. And that began a groundswell because I wasn't the only one wondering, well, how much more could we have seen? How much quicker could we have told someone? How could we have done better? Who could we have helped better? And how could we make smarter, right choices? That's the perfect AI problem. And even without it, we took 37 tons of already weaponized material off the battlefield, material where if you put 25 to 50 pounds of it together, it can damage convoys, vehicles, and people patrolling, and directly incited, recognized as saving 2,500 lives at very critical, timely points of discovery. You know, for some recognition on that number and context, there have been 3,500 deaths total of coalition and US troops there in the Middle East and Afghanistan. And despite any subsequent professional accolade or even a recent personal accomplishment like a book, it's the women and men of and on that mission that I'm most proud of to this day. And I don't think that'll ever change. From there, I moved on to be the director of target development in the counter ISIS Operation Inherent Resolve campaign we mentioned, you know, using these data-centric models to make better decisions, right? That's a key word here. And perhaps being largely successful as we became a little more cognizant of why data matters to us in each of our lives, and, you know, maybe a little more mature and adult at that time to explain artificial intelligence. But the point of it all is it could lead to better outcomes depending on what we do with it. And then from there, I went to the Pentagon as the Air Force lead for artificial intelligence and the speechwriter for the director of Air Force intelligence and cyber operations. And I'm a fan right now of starting with some analogies. And if I could pick up an electrical outlet behind me or a microwave in the kitchen, I would bring it over. Or maybe I would, you know, bring over a hammer. For most of us, I hope all of us, we probably have one of these things I've mentioned in our house. We're not electricians, but we use electricity. We're not engineers, but we use microwaves. Many of us drive cars, but fewer could build, and even fewer could both build the car and code the software in our cars today. And all of us use hammers without being master craftspeople. And those of us in quarantine using our kitchen appliances, could you build an oven? Again, the microwave, or myself, the Instapot in my kitchen, which I love and I'm simultaneously terrified of when I hit the steam release button. While we may not understand each of these things intimately, they're familiar. And with each of these everyday instruments, we can be incredibly effective with them, yet we can also do damage with them. AI itself is a lot like this in certain ways. So while I look back and think of my love for technology, I think about books like Sagan's Cosmos, Hawking's Universe in a Nutshell, or being 10 years old and reading Brian Greene's The Elegant Universe over and over again. You know, string theory didn't really pan out, but that's a different conversation. Or Harari's Sapiens recently. Their favorites like Tolstoy, Huxley, Virginia Woolf, and so many more, including favorites like If You Give a Mouse a Cookie or Goodnight Moon. And I'm going somewhere here. These books all have something in common. They are debating and discussing topics of consciousness, theories of physics, biology, social realities, technologies, and all the rest of the things that constitute the human experience. And that's where good literature, good podcasts, conversations like this, that's where they consist of, centered around candid dialogue, maybe that's with someone else or others, but maybe that's reading a book with yourself too. And for me, the concepts of consciousness, experience, social order, biology, frankly, the human story is brought together in technology and especially in AI. And many bring the points to light, but fewer to life. So as we move forward and talk about artificial intelligence, I think the most important thing is that we realize that it is an extremely powerful tool. And it is just that, a tool. It's a sharp instrument that shouldn't be callously wielded or casually accepted, especially when it's in the wrong or uninformed hands, or when it's used for intentionally intrusive or oppressive purposes that we see throughout society today. And these are serious issues. They're issues for everyone. And we can take steps to make sure that we connect the overall dots and kind of understand it like, hey, don't put that fork in the electrical outlet or tinfoil in the microwave. But despite everything at risk, despite all the conversations, despite the fact that it has literally changed the game of baseball as we see in the World Series, it creates its own art. It creates mis and disinformation, fake news. You could largely blame the stock market crash on early applications of machine learning. For most of us, it still remains a problem for technologists, engineers, and IT people. And then we're very confused by its depictions in modern science fiction. The realities, though, of AI are important to understand. So in this book, I explain realities from a human-oriented perspective that's easy to comprehend through anecdotal storytelling. You have to know a bit about our own evolution, the development of languages, the scales of numbers, both big and small, some basics of history, how a computer works, of course, how your own brain works. Then let's discuss what is artificial intelligence. Because without context, it's the same circular conversation where we're too often speaking below, above, past, and through one another. And then after that, the big stuff, because now we have a relative understanding, the global implications that are at hand, how countries like China use it for their all-purpose tools to oppose authoritarian influence around the world, how Russia uses it through its military systems and efforts to disrupt democracy by whatever disinformation means possible. And then for ourselves, America and like-minded nations, how we want it to echo loudly the political foundations and moral imperatives upon which we were formed. But in order to talk about any of those aspects, we needed the three legs to the tripod. And I mentioned storytelling is how we learn, storytelling about what makes us us. And for me, I wanted to write a book that did that for everyone, highly narrative, storytelling that, it's true as a personal thought hero of mine, Carl Sagan. If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. The same goes for talking about AI.
Thank you. Very nice overview of your book and also the issue. I know that you're one of your primary reasons for doing this book was because of your concern for Western traditions, Western, the way we do things with democracy and that. And, what I can see too, even when I read your book, but as I watch this all the time, is the growth in the competitive level around the world. And I know that right now, China, above all, even above Russia, I think, is really going gung-ho. They believe, and I think it was in 2017, wasn't it, that you mentioned Putin made the statement that whoever controls this will rule the world. And I firmly believe that because this is the technology which allows anyone or everyone to get inside everything, inside our homes, inside our businesses, inside our government. And the thing that I believe, I think along with you, is that it's important that we all understand the issue, because I would like to see people continue this upswell of interest in how the government works and influencing how policies are made and all of that. And I would like to see people understand this very critical issue so that they can approach their legislators and that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I've spent my life trying to promote citizens' involvement in their government, because in this country, if we don't have that, we have nothing. It won't work. So I'm very happy that you have the particular focus that you have in here. And I would like to ask if anybody here has a question for Mike at this point. Just go ahead and raise your hand, or you can unmute your microphone, or because otherwise I'm gonna have to make up a whole bunch of questions and I don't want to hog the light. Hey, Dan, go for it.
Yeah, I'll ask one, Linda. Michael, we read a lot about the advances that China is making, China in particular is making in AI. And so I'm wondering, can you fill us in on what you know about that, and both the good aspects and the bad aspects, please?
This is a great topic and I appreciate it. When it comes to artificial intelligence, there's this, how do we bring it into our lives? And what is China doing differently than us? It's experience. You know, the first thing to recognize is that the terms artificial intelligence, largely most tech terms in general, are so overused, misunderstood, and broad to the point they're meaningless. So as a society, we want to say, well, how do I address that? The second is the reality, academically speaking, that there is not yet a shared or prevailing and clear and convincing notion of trust in general. Now, in order to get to this esoteric topic of trust, we want to try to develop experiences. So when we think about China, we tend to think of a backwater nation. I don't think we quite comprehend how sophisticated digitally they are, while their lives or the pictures we see are certainly atrocities to us and wholly unacceptable standard of life. It's mutually exclusive of the fact that their lives are better than they were because of applications like WeChat, which I talk about in the book, or just some of their surveillance technologies. They're quite effective with these things. So they're learning to trust through experience. Broadly, when we talk about China, they are a major driver of their authoritarian ends and AI surveillance technologies worldwide. Technology linked to companies, particularly Huawei, Hikvision, and ZTE, supply these technologies to, and we just kind of pull down the veil. 63 countries as we speak, and 36 of those countries have already signed on to China's Belt Road Initiative. And Huawei is particularly responsible for providing most of these in concert and must share with the People's Republic and the Chinese Communist Party. And I should rephrase, because I'm guilty of this as well. When we say China, we should be very precise. We should say the Chinese Communist Party. Chinese people aren't necessarily guilty of any of these things. But when we talk about China and their work with other people, going through, again, experiencing using artificial intelligence, most of the time these pitches come with loans that push people to buy more of their equipment, and then subsequently you make the AI better and it all goes back to China. And this is particularly clear in countries like Kenya, Zimbabwe, Ecuador, and others where they, again, practice this experience. And the incentives are all there to accept repressive technologies. In Africa alone, for instance, according to Deloitte, the number is somewhere in the ballpark of $150 billion of services to advance their means of using technologies to then take that back into mainland China. But the question to ask as we move forward is, at what cost? Because if, for instance, with Kenya, 20 some odd % of its external debt is to China. And how does this play out? What happens then when they need more money, or they need to do something, or they're not executing in the Chinese narrative or Xi Jinping's vision of the world? Well, they need $5 billion to finish a train track there, but China won't give it to them until they, again, accept more debt and accept more of these technologies. So China's goal is to export all of these tools worldwide. So that means these advancements have a circular effect of informing internal party research and development, and then furthering their implementation in other countries. And that plays out in everyday life to a significant effect, like the crackdown on Uyghurs through techniques like computer vision discussed in the book and the surveillance of them, or the further development of social credit systems and internal monitoring for dissidents. And I talk a lot about these realities in the book and try to tear down the red wall per se in some of these chapters to paint the picture a bit more clearly of how effective they are. Now, for us as Americans, we have a lot of conversations right now of, well, which technology should we choose? And it plays out, for instance, in the news lately on TikTok. Well, when we talk about some of these technologies and the way in which AI is developed, it's a pretty sophisticated and intellectual argument to make to the American public. Trade off capability and your way to enjoy life by, making videos on the internet, which are great, or by using the computer vision to make, the funny bunny faces you see with your kids. But it's a hard argument to say, but when you use that platform, that furthers the development of AI in ways that you don't deem, necessary or acceptable in Western views of society. Again, human dignity and our rights that stem from there. So when it comes to China, I think it's all about experience that makes a big difference while we conjecture about the science fiction and Terminators.
Mitch.
Just to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just to follow up on that a bit. So I haven't read all of the book, but I've read most of it. And am I right, Mike, that one of the ways to kind of answer the question about what China's doing with this in sort of a fundamental way, too, in addition to what you said, is just to simply say that, look, China is using its technology to its advantage by offering it to a lot of the world that otherwise couldn't get it. That sort of ties China into those countries, makes those countries reliant on China. And then on top of it all, a lot of those technologies that they're providing those countries have AI elements, and all that data ends up feeding back to China, which makes them capable of making even better AI. Am I right about that?
That's largely the cycle of machine learning. I do think that it's worth bringing up. China has made many initiatives to enter into the global marketplace, primarily on microprocessor units and semiconductors that really didn't pan out for them. Now, in the virtuous cycle that is machine learning, the way that if I get more data and I use it more, then by deduction, it will get better. There is an argument to be made that in the long term, though, which I think should be the argument of us, is that it might be incredibly biased itself, or that they might be reliant on too many countries just from a natural resource standpoint or economic realities that aren't capable of sustaining these actions. So what we want to do as a society is to say, what they are doing is wholly unacceptable. Let's keep their market share or the cap, 22% of the industry, but do not let it get to 35%, where you might see a sign for a Huawei or Baidu phone here in Western countries. But again, this comes down to, they do have great capabilities, and we need to figure out how to make the argument and play to our higher sensibilities to not use these technologies.
Well, and then just one last thing. One of the things that was kind of eye-opening for me was just to realize that as these mega companies in China create these technologies and provide them to the world, it's not free enterprise in the way that we think of it at all. Every time one of those companies that's Chinese-based, Chinese owned, even quote unquote privately, they are, as you mentioned, completely, if not subservient to the Communist Party. All of their information and all of their resources are by law open and available to the Communist Party to use essentially to whatever extent they want. And that is the biggest difference between China and America, and people either think, well, they're communist and they're backwards, which of course is nonsense, or they think, well, actually, they're a capitalist society too, but not at all in the vein that American capitalism operates. There's a separation between private and public sectors in America that simply doesn't exist in China. So as all those companies get footholds, Chinese companies get footholds across the globe, so too does the Chinese government. Simple as that. Am I right?
That's a great point. It's very quickly when you're developing AI to fall down a very slippery slope argument and rabbit hole, because after we kind of demystify the technology and this idea of data all around us, and data makes these applications in our machine better, what ends up happening is then you say, well, if only I had more data, right? But you can see how very quickly that can get into a slippery slope, because I do want to highlight the ability of a country, or a company or a citizen to say, no, I do not want to share that with a federal government. That's a hallmark of American society. So how do we start to deal with the realities that perhaps in the short term, they're quite effective, but in the long term, playing again to higher sensibilities, they aren't quite as effective. But you can get stuck in the slippery slope fast.
Great comments, Mitch and Dan. I would like to just move it aside to a little bit of fun now for just a second. Ever since I saw the movie AI, and you're probably familiar with that, with little Haley Joel Osment, it put a whole different sort of picture on the concept of human-like robots, that everyone thinks, oh yeah, someday we're going to have this. I think that my sense is the difficulty, you may have a body and you may have a mind, but at what point does that creation take on a soul? Because there is a difference in my mind on that level. Can you speak to that fun idea that everybody wants to have about the future?
There's a great point you make here. So when we talk about these technologies, we almost aren't doing ourselves any favors by saying the word artificial intelligence. Intelligence carries a whole lot of baggage into the conversation, because throughout the history of the human race, we never saw anything that was intelligent, which we'll just define as doing something for a purpose, and could learn, which is changing over time with new experiences, which for a machine, experience is data, data is experience for us, without having the prerequisite of consciousness. What we would be well served to do, much like, behind me, I have a Nest thermostat. If it was a normal thermostat, I might say, well, I can change the temperature with it, so I'm going to give that 1 unit of intelligence. Doesn't mean it does anything outside of its domain or intended purpose, whatever. But now I have a Nest, and it knows I like the house at 67 degrees, which is in summertime is way too high of a bill, but it is what it is, right? So it changes when I walk back into the home. So it can learn. These biological machines have this capability now, underpinned by the advancements in artificial intelligence. So what you would do is you would say, well, consciousness needs to go to the bottom of the stack. It's no longer consciousness, intelligence, learning. It's intelligence, learning. Consciousness is something that nobody has ever been able to define. When we start to look at it like that, I think what we start to think about is reasonable applications of the technology. Companionship. There is so much we could do with artificial intelligence now, to have your robot dog who can run around the house or go sit next to you, right? That has a cute face. It emotes like us. And perhaps it could understand based on, hey, they're no longer working in their home right now. They're sitting on the couch. So I'm going to go sit next to my human, right? That is feasible. That exists. I think for the time being, in relation to the movie AI, that we could look at it as companionship, and we could make advances in order to, pay attention to human emotion. Does that mean it will ever do anything outside of its domain or the things that it has been presented, like artificial general intelligence? I can't predict the future, but what I do know is that it will take an advancement that is not on the foreseeable horizon. It would take an advancement far beyond the ones and zeros within our machine, because we as humans, we're not ones and zeros. That's just the case. We're something bigger than that. So I think like if we really think about it and encapsulate it, the point of the inspiration from movies like AI, Her, Wall-E, which is my favorite AI movie. I think there's a lot to be gained that we can use certain aspects of it for companionship for the time being, and to help us, have something to work and interact with.
And you mentioned Wall-E, which brings up, of course, the idea of at what point do we have so much being done for us by our gizmos that we no longer even function as healthy human beings? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. Okay. This is an interesting conversation, because I'm quite bullish on the future of the workforce, the future of the human, and what we could perhaps value. We as humans are doing far too many non-human things. We are very concerned that artificial intelligence could perhaps take a job. Well, if artificial intelligence could take a job, then we are not using that human the appropriate way. So when I say it won't replace people, which I'll get somewhere here, I mean they are going to move elsewhere to do more human things. And in some ways, I think we're going to create more jobs in this respect. So done right, I mean broad societal understanding and attention to this topic, I'm bullish on it. However, I'm not so bullish on necessarily doing it right now. So I wonder what a world could exist like. And President Obama has a fantastic article where he was so ahead of his time on this topic in Vanity Fair, I think in 2016, where he described a world where maybe we pay teachers more. Maybe, perhaps, we reward stay-at-home parents. Perhaps we value artists in new ways, the human spirit stuff. Now, alternatively to your point, I would say that it is very easy to say, well, the machine told me to do that, so I'm just going to, I'm inclined to be lazy and not think through that, right? And then we can have some weird tertiary, side effects that are, unanticipated. But at the same time, what it comes down to is we want to use this technology to get humans doing some more human things. I think about our companies right now. We all watched, or some of us, paid attention to the news, to the Senate big tech hearings yesterday on Section 230. Here's a concept that I hope we try to inculcate around with our companies. You can do well by doing good. That's the nuance, because traditional visions for, perhaps a publicly shared company is I have a fiduciary responsibility to make more money in the next quarter, right? It's very simple. It's actually what I'm legally obligated to do. But we can make the argument, and we're seeing this in society, the values and norms of today are the laws of tomorrow, is something I think is special. And how do we get people to say, I can do well by doing good? And in addition to that, if I think about this AI thing appropriately, broadly, maybe we won't become, sitting back in those lazy people. But what, again, depends on how well we are educated.
Anybody else have any questions or thoughts about the topic? Yeah. Hi, Candace. You want to unmute? You have to, let's see here.
Okay.
There you
go. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for sharing. you're talking a lot about concrete, what we're doing. And I think differently in terms of consciousness a lot. And so when you were talking, it made me think about, I don't know if you know Carolyn Mace. She talks about this being a time of consciousness. We're going through a shift, and a previous shift was nuclear power. That was a big shift in consciousness, and it's kind of like the danger of it. We had to go into our better selves or that. And to me, this seems like that. I know all of my clients right now are going through major spiritual conscious shifts and looking for something beyond themselves and going back to what they used to know and that. And so anyway, I'm hoping, I'm very trustful of our government. I worked in a federal prison for 5 years. I know way too much, but I do believe in human evolution. So anyway, can you speak to that?
I really love what you just brought up. There's so much that remains on the horizon if we use the technology appropriately, or it illuminates doing more human things, as I had mentioned. So the technologies you've talked about, nuke, that was what we deemed as, kind of broadly as the second offset. Humans are special because, kind of in a simple sense, we can create things that wouldn't exist in nature on their own accord, right? I mean, it's almost that simple. A crow can use fire to burn their nest a little bit, even though we don't necessarily always think that animals can use tools or to stick into a log for a monkey and take out some ants and eat them. But what humans do is we create the artificial, right? Almost to artificial intelligence. So nuke was something that was physically manifested, that we had a direct view of. We saw the damage that could be done. It played to, again, those sensibilities of what makes us us, that stem from the concept and internal view of dignity, the right to live. The concern I have, though, with artificial intelligence is you can't always see it. So it really harkens back on, as there is a somewhat onslaught of public education and non-contemporary education, that where this really starts to enable what I think you're getting at is expanding the mind and not thinking about the rote, linear, automated functions of everyday life, or to illuminate like the nuke. This can do a lot of damage for us. It's something that may be able to connect us more, but until we have a focus on young and old, manager, everyone alike, to say, well, let's just peel back the onion. Let's talk about what this thing AI is. I think, to your point, we could really inspire a revolution in thinking and caring for others.
Mm-hmm. And connection. I most of my clients are overseas. So it's that connection, that instant, well, like this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I have a chapter, the unifying languages, and I use this of man and machine, but human and machine, right? It's interesting that we get to connect like this in such a meaningful way. And it's really driven by the unifying languages of us expressing, our thoughts to a machine, right? And then making it so that you and I can connect. If we can look at it in this positive sense to take society somewhere positive, I think there's some benefit to connect more. And in fact, when we think about, a little tech geek here, when we code on our machines, if you code in Germany or China or Russia or Japan, whatever it is, it's the same thing that you're doing here, right? So maybe there's a way that we can use this technology to connect us in more interesting ways and meaningful ways. But again, we have to really demystify what it is and then of course, not just play to, well, it can only be negative. And I think that we as citizens have an obligation almost to help, journey along that path.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions, Sue or Nancy? We haven't heard, or Brenda, or do you just want to listen?
I only one thing is going through my mind from this most recent part of the conversation in artificial intelligence, using it for good. And we all have such different perceptions on what good is. How can it ever really turn out the best way?
Well, this is one of my favorite topics. It's making sure that we are most appropriately represented in the ways that we memorialize the world around us, right? So those who are not represented in life, or in this case for artificial intelligence, in data, will not have their views of happiness and what good it actually means relative to them, kind of exposed to these machines that then work on our everyday lives. And let me give you a very concrete example of this. We would never want an Alexa in our homes that was only trained on Southern white gentlemen or just people from Northern California, right? Because its scope is far too broad for that. And what you're really highlighting here is the concept of bias and why we need to address it. So in the most simple terms of this AI stuff, it's just code in a machine that is designed to analyze data and then formulate predictions without guidance from us. Once upon a time, we had to explicitly code an input, and then we generally expected what the output is. So if that's the case, and we take that as truth, which it is, then just because an algorithm looks at data, it will not mean its output is neutral or objectively fair, and our human biases will be within it. And worse, if we take that data and then the insights we create, if we take action on that bias analysis, then the underlying biases perpetuate and ingrain historical and cultural inequities even deeper into our lives. The thing that we should be focused on right now and can do in our personal lives is this concept of bridging the digital divide to make sure you are most represented in the machine, because as it comes down from these major conglomerates, it will affect us all. Often AI is compared to as oil. It's kind of a crude reference, and this total cheap pun, but a crude reference. It's really more like electricity, except it's only as good as what it has seen. So for us, throughout America, there are literally hundreds of millions of people lacking meaningful broadband access to even use this data or make themselves represented, and they will be left behind. So what we want to do, to your point, is really highlight, well, what is good for the largest group of people. The first tangible step to doing that is making sure we're represented in these machines.
Which I suspect is something that we could aim at least through our legislative process. And so that's a point where I was going to say, maybe you can touch on the ideas of how every citizen, or just the average person like me, can work, or in what's the best way we can apply ourselves to make sure that at least the best that we can come at will get done in the future and not the worst.
Well, yeah, let's talk about the challenges and the realities for education, which we can control because we can demand a bit of our local governments, our state governments, and then broadly through voting and legislative action. This year, we are going to graduate 50,000 people with what we call STEM-like degrees, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math. We have 500,000 open jobs right now. But we live in a world where the barriers to education, because of these digital opportunities, have never been lower. So for myself, I don't care if this person has a traditional degree or from college or not. Have they done it? Can they do it? Are they the citizen coder? And how do we, or do they have a passion to learn? We have an obligation to give them access to that education. And how do we as a nation help drive down the gap is what matters. Because in only a few short years, the number of open jobs, and to keep the movie references going with Dr. Evil, is 1 million open jobs in this space. So we must reimagine what education is and demand that. And by the way, we often get hung up on discussing how well or how much more do we teach people math, right? And it's important, and contemporary education is woefully outdated and not enough to fill the gap, even as, even if we take a serious approach right now. But we also need the humanities. And maybe that's where the failure to launch, again, a pun intended, is right now. I think of the future rock stars in artificial intelligence, our kids, the people who are our youth learning right now, where we can focus to make the point that you have. They are teachers, they are parents, they are sociologists, they are psychologists, they are lawyers. That's where we want to go. Some of that fuzzy stuff actually becomes far more important because we've seen the sci-fi. So most importantly, I think the underlying theme is moving forward in the future for our populace is a reminder that learning is a lifetime sport, and especially at moments like we had mentioned with nuke technology and the like, that they catalyze us to once again realize we need to engage and inspire, and the proverbial boardroom, the thing you're talking about, must look different. In the case of artificial intelligence, how long could you have possibly been doing this field as it currently exists? 5, 6, 7 years? For the people around us, for the people we elect, frankly speaking, the most strategic thinker probably looks different. It's from a different generation. I think of this concept of teaming the techniques of the seasoned, of the old, with the ideas of the new. When it comes to AI, you don't know what question it will, or insight or pattern it will illuminate. Humility in the digital age. We should demand that, and we should demand more education. Because whatever the policies are, whatever the party is, we can agree that we need a populace that's more informed, more cognizant, some experts, some practitioners, some thinkers. And I think that's a place where we could start.
Goodness, I've covered almost all my points so far. Anybody have something else they'd like to throw in the mix?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to kind of follow up on what Nancy asked about. And basically, Nancy, it's funny, you sort of articulated well, as you were saying it, I realized you articulated pretty well the thought that I had sort of inside me when I began reading this book. And the idea or the thought in my head was, well, this isn't going to go well, right? This can't possibly be a technology that ends up going well. And I thought what was really cool about the book was right off the bat, Mike at least sort of, I don't know, address that concern of mine by saying, look, the point of this book is to inspire a conversation about this technology that simply has to be had. Because if we don't have the conversation, then yes, we shouldn't expect it to go any way other than a place we might not want it to go. And then as I continued reading, living through sort of everything all of us are, and I don't mean to take a position on politics one way or another, but I think one thing we would all agree is the travesty here is that we've got a new technology emerging that, yes, is in many ways analogous influence-wise to nuclear energy, but our news cycles and our attention has been completely consumed for the last 4+ years on nothing but politics. And Nancy, I came out, or at least I guess I'm waiting to see where I land at the end of the book, but I came out of the beginning of the third section of the book where Mike gets into, so what's really happening in the world, thinking to myself, boy, we need to get through this election one way or another. The American public needs to start hearing about things that I think we heard more about 5, 6, 10 years ago. And I think AI is going to eventually, hopefully, here in America, find itself on the public debate stage. And transparency and information and knowledge about what this technology is all about is so desperately needed, because then we get back to Linda's point, which is we can't expect our citizens to approach their legislators about their concerns about a technology when they don't have any idea the technology is there to be understood if we only had something else to talk about. So I don't know if that helps, Nancy, but I understand exactly what you're saying. My only hope is that in a digital, easily informed world, hopefully one day soon, people will start consuming information again that means something to them going forward, instead of always looking at, man, what happened this morning? And that's all I'm going to talk about today. So I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Yeah, I couldn't said it better myself. So yes.
Very good. Yes.
Very well articulated, Mitch. That was great. It's a joy to have you with us today. I don't know how we all are on time, Mike. It's almost 12 o'clock. Did you have something you have to do? Do you have any closing comments about, I'm interested in your recommendation for what is the best source of information or the best way that we and others can keep up with this topic. There's a lot of distrust of some areas of science right now, but what is our best approach?
It is almost a field that I actually recently hired someone whose sole job is to read the new papers and to keep up with whatever the new advancement is. Because in this sphere, the commercial and academic world has held it as a due obligation, which is right in the most part, to publicly develop this technology and then share it broadly. Now, alternatively, it's dual use technology. So some of the technologies I talk about in the book and explain, in very simple human ways that anyone can understand, is that there's a dual use to them. For instance, with the things we hear about deep fakes. It's the best technique in order to detect breast cancer. Makes a huge difference to doctors. If you take that and use it on a different data set, it creates fake news, or what we deem as propaganda nowadays, disinformation, misinformation. So it's hard to keep up on the space itself. In terms of where we look to for people, giving the right kind of news, giving the right kind of updates, it's such a small community that is very personality driven. And what I think is really important is to look at each of the personalities and then in a very human way say, well, who is this person, right? I want to understand, what is their end motive and what are they trying to do here? Because again, it could be to, simply maximize shareholder profit. It could be somebody who might be a very public voice, but is perhaps represented by another country or beholden to advance their causes. So the first thing is I would just look to the meaningful people and to say, what are they like? On the second piece, I am hard pressed to find literally any policy that went from both the previous administration to the current administration, except for artificial intelligence. It is the only policy that was started in another and finished in this one, and then publicly provided to the world and shared in advancements like creating new commissions on artificial intelligence, like for instance, the National Science Foundation. It is the only place that doesn't have that flavor. So I'd start with looking at some of those organizations in the public works, because I can, testify to the case. They are altruistic in nature. And then the last piece is of course the major companies. They have their research pages, and then you can kind of see what's going on. Chiefly Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Apple, as you would imagine, IBM, and companies like Oracle. I would read literally what the advancements they're making is as their public releases, because it's not conjecture, it's not what is right or wrong. This is what was created. What we want to do is get to brass tacks on, okay, what is that technology itself? But I wish there was a better space outside of being on what's called archive, arxiv.org, where many papers are published. They're a little bit math heavy to find where the best news is. But I would find voices that you respect, admire, and know their background on.
Well, I think everyone today has enjoyed your presentation, Michael, and I can guarantee you I will be promoting your book and this whole thing for a long time to come. I appreciate Dan for your article in the paper. That was wonderful. I think it'll continue to promote and help people to connect too. And thanks for everyone for your time. It was wonderful. I appreciate you showing up. And that's about it, I guess. Thank you.
Truly grateful, and we will keep promoting independent bookstores or where to buy books. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you, Mitch.
Thank you so much.
Linda,
Yeah.
when people want to disappear here, I have another book you might also want to promote. I have not read it personally, but I think it might be a really sought after book.
Huh?
It's, I think it is at Auntie's, Cast, C-A-S-T-E.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a current bestseller. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I understand it's really fantastic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
wanted to bring that up.
Discusses the whole history of the country and how we have lived in a caste system, whether we've been aware of it or not, or called it that. And yeah, it's a great one. Thank you. I appreciate that. You have a wonderful day, Nancy.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. Bye-bye.